From the studios of EWTN, this is Open Line. With today's host, Colin Donovan. In North America, call toll-free 1-833-288-EWTN. That's 1-833-288-3986. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000 or send an email to openline@EWTN.com.
Hey, tremendous Friday to each and every one of you. Thanks so much for carving a little time out of the end of your week to join us here on EWTN's Open Line. Prayers go out to all of those in the great state of Florida and along the eastern seaboard who may be looking to get themselves ready for Hurricane Dorian. We are in our prayers, to be sure. And hopefully everything will work out as it's supposed to. I know Father John Paul Mary, that many of you are familiar with, at the noon Mass today, offered an intention that through the intercession of our Blessed Mother, that rascal would take a right turn and head out to sea. So
yeah, and it looks favorable, at least in terms of turning, but up the peninsula, which is no good. So maybe between the Bahamas and Florida would be better.
Yeah. 833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. That's the voice of Colin Donovan, our Vice President of Theology. We talk theology here on Fridays, 833-288-3986. If you're outside the United States and Canada, we'd love to hear from you. Your number is 1-205-271-2985, and we'll put you straight to the front of the line at 1-205-271-2985. You can always send us an email, openline@EWTN.com, or you can text your question to Colin. Text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for a response. Text your first name and your question, message, and data rates may apply. I'm Jack Williams. Michael McCall producing the program. Your call screener is Ryan Penny and Jeff Burson handling our social media endeavors. So if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook Live, type a question into the chat window. It may find its way to us by the end of the hour. And our host, as he is every Friday, as I mentioned earlier, our very own Vice President of Theology, Mr. Colin Donovan. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good.
We have a question here. It's left over from Call to Communion, where a caller was inquiring about gluten-free hosts. And he wanted to, I guess the caller wanted them to address the specifics of gluten-free hosts and their use in Mass and how much percentage of gluten is allowed, and so on. So
et cetera,
so I guess
et cetera.
gluten-free is a bit of a misnomer to begin with, huh?
It really is. And I listened to that answer Davey gave on the theology and the philosophy. He does a tremendous job. I don't think he got to this part, which is why we're addressing it today. Let's back up a little bit to the early 2000s, when the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, when Joseph Ratzinger was prefect of that congregation, published a letter to the church saying that absolute free from gluten is invalid matter for the Eucharist. But low gluten hosts could be valid matter for the Eucharist. He did a similar thing with mustum and wine, that if you had an alcohol-free wine, grape juice essentially, it wouldn't be valid. So fermentation had to be begun even if it were stopped, say, by heating or some other way. But it had to have begun so that there was some alcohol present. And the reason is, and Dave sort of alluded to this in his answer, the church's understanding of substance here. A substance is not a chemical formula. We think of substance, the substance of salt or the substance of bread. We think of the carbons and the hydrogen and the different molecules that make it up and so on and so forth. That's not what the church means by substance. The easiest way would be to call it the whatness of a thing, and that would be to define its nature. He gave the example of dog or cat, something like this, or human or angel or whatever. And that is that one would commonly speak of this as, dog, cat, or angel, whether it's three-legged or four-legged and so on and so forth. So what is it when we say that the substance of bread is necessary? Bread has a common definition. We know lots of things made from flour and water with the other ingredients added in. Some of them are called cakes, some of them are called cookies, some of them are called biscuits, and so on. Pasta even can be made from. So there's all kinds of things made from the same ingredients. But commonly, we know what bread is. People in their usage speak of bread. Whether it's the unleavened bread used at the Passover, as in our rite, or the leavened bread used in the Eastern churches, Catholic and Orthodox, nonetheless, that's bread. It has the common designation of bread, and we know bread from cookie, cake, or whatever. So when the church is looking to say at what point the presence of gluten is so low, the question is it too low such that we would no longer call this bread? Does it need to be bolstered by some other things? Do you have to put additional chemicals and things not normally in bread to give it the substance and appearance of bread? If you have to do that, that's invalid. So you can go as low on the gluten scale as necessary to retain the appearance of bread without using other things such as would not ordinarily be used either as constituents or in the process of making bread. Now, when you get to the specifics of that, the standard for low gluten, the government standard, the FDA, is 20 parts per million. So if you get a number between that 20 and and 0, higher than 0 such that you can retain the appearance of bread, but it's low gluten enough to not bother celiacs, then that's what you're shooting for. There is a bit of a danger here, and the same danger exists with regard to the wine used in the Mass. Although by necessity a priest could say, oh, we don't have any wine, I can't get sacramental wine by Monday or Sunday or whenever, and go down to Publix and look to find a wine that's not been adulterated, boosted, or whatever, closest to the natural that he could find, and then use that. That's necessity, the law of necessity. Otherwise, there are approved suppliers of wine in the United States, and there are also 4 approved suppliers of low gluten hosts. So you don't go into your kitchen and try to cook up a low gluten host or go down, to some generic store. If you go to the website of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, usccb.org, and you put in gluten, that page with the approved suppliers of both low mustum or mustum wine as well as low gluten hosts, that should come up.
Rich is watching on YouTube, Colin, and he says, can you comment on the upcoming African Synod and its agenda, quote unquote, and also the recent document signed by Pope Francis that seems to suggest God might want multiple religions?
Yeah, I think he means the South American Synod, the Amazon Synod. Yeah, I think a lot of people have pointed to the problematic language in there. It seems to be very culturally determined, and there is a legitimate element for enculturation in the church. The church allows that. The church speaks about it. In a sense, all the different rites of the church are enculturations of the one, you might call pristine liturgy of the Last Supper, and are enculturated in the West, in the Latin Rite, the Mozarabic, the Gallic rites, and so on, or in the East by the Syro-Malabar, the Melkite, the Maronite, Coptic Orthodox, Byzantine, or whatever. So enculturation is fine, but I think a lot of people question that some of the things that are addressed in that letter don't really deal with the basic problems of the Amazon region. I don't live in the Amazon. I've never been to the Amazon. I don't know. I'm just talking about people who have studied the matter or have served in the Amazon as bishop and priest. They even question whether this document really addresses the true needs there, as well as the theological questions themselves regarding some elements of it.
Multiple religions?
Yeah, the Pope tried to clarify himself, and the way he did it was referring to this doctrine of the fact that there is the permissive will of God. And I would say a theologian parses everything, permissive will, ordained will, and so on and so forth. The saints never do that. My Mother Angelica never do that. If every day is the satisfaction of the will of God in good and in bad things, and the bad things are crosses, the good things are consolations, both of those are the will of God, and the saints never theologically parse as a program of life what is God's will. Every moment is God's will, good and bad. And so I think, to say providentially there are all these other religions, we can nonetheless say many things about the truth and the fact that the church possesses it completely and wholly. And those can be said, but I think that he was trying to say something along the lines of God's will expressed in these things.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. Open line Friday with Colin Donovan.
Vatican officials will meet to decide the fate of disgraced former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick.
Pro-life leaders applauding the president's strong stand for life.
A new poll finds most Americans, including those identifying as pro-choice, are opposed to late-term abortion.
And Pope Francis says the death penalty is contrary to the gospel.
News headlines you can have faith in. Weekdays at the top of the hour on EWTN Radio.
Bishop Robert Barron.
I'm kind of a teacher by nature, and I've always loved books and ideas and life of the mind and speaking and all that. So I brought that into the priesthood. A very wise thing was said a long time ago, namely that if God chose you to be a priest, he chose you to be a priest, meaning he chose you with your particular gifts and what you're going to bring. So you don't leave that behind. On the contrary, God chose me with these particular gifts. So I've always discerned that teaching and writing and preaching and proclaiming would be a key part of it. And it has been. I found great joy in that. I've always found joy in the pastoral work. I did it when I was newly ordained. I was in a parish for 4 years. And whenever I would go to a hospital, I go to a nursing home, go into the school, counsel, engage couples. I always found great joy in that, even though it's challenging.
The people you know and trust are on EWTN.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question, call 1-833-288-EWTN. That's 1-833-288-3986. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. Or send us an email to openline@EWTN.com.
Tonight, Catholic Answers Live, 6 o'clock Eastern Time. In hour number 1, Monsignor Eugene Morris talks about the sacrament of holy orders. And in hour number 2, it's the Catholic Answers Quiz Show. Be sure to check it out tonight. Catholic Answers Live, 6 Eastern Time, right here on EWTN Radio. To the phones we go. Our leadoff hitter today is Marianne in Lampasas, Texas, listening on Sirius XM Channel 130. Marianne, you're on with Colin Donovan.
Hello.
Hey there, Marianne.
Yes, I hope that. How are you? I hope that my question is related to the Eucharist. It is. I'm very distressed about the people that go to Mass are so, I don't even know a word. They're not properly dressed, but it's very offensive. And I don't think it's just offensive to me. I think it's mostly offensive to God and to a lot of people that are there.
Sure, yeah.
But
yeah. Well, it's summer, and you see the variation of short socks and no socks. Fortunately, I've not seen swimsuits only, but there are probably some places where that occurs.
You don't go to Mass at the beach, do you?
No.
They're
well,
there.
I've been to the Mass at the beach, but
they're there.
They're there. Okay. This is a problem. I don't know what the ordinary person in the pew can do. I mean, if you've got a family member or a friend with whom you would have some traction, so to speak, yes, fraternal correction would be in order. To give fraternal correction against a stranger would probably be a waste of time. What really needs to happen is catechesis from the pulpit. That's what's needed. And I'm sure this is not happening in Lampasas. It must be happening in Harlingen or somewhere else in Texas, So, but anyway, if you're visiting someplace, it's the kind of thing that, say to the pastor how this is a distraction to many people at Mass, and you're probably, the old rule of for every person who says something, there are at least 10, if not more, others who would like to say it but haven't. So you can confidently say that this will be a distraction to many, and besides the simply distractive element of it, there is you pointed out quite correctly, there is the reverential element of it, and you could, he may hem and haw. What could I do about? Well, Father, what about some, homilies on the dignity of the Eucharist, or the dignity of the Mass, the dignity of the person dressing at least fully for something so sublime as the Mass. We wouldn't go into an audience with the Pope. We wouldn't go into an audience with the president, any president, Trump or Obama. We wouldn't go into any audience with some other civil or dignitary or famous person dressed so casually. Why would we go into Mass? That's the argument I think you can use if you can people who will listen to you and you can discuss it with them.
Well, and with regard to getting people to listen to you, a lot of times if you go after people, that's not really the approach that they're going to be the most open to sometimes. And I think it's important that when you hold a conviction about something, and let's keep in mind that they're not necessarily, if they're not wearing something that we would wear to Mass, they're not necessarily outside of what is acceptable in the eyes of Holy Mother Church.
And their degree of culpability, we know how
That's
bad catechesis has been the last 50 years in some places. So I think some gentleness is called for, or perhaps they just came from something and this is their last opportunity for Mass. But you could approach them with charity and simplicity, and not with accusation and the idea to
and
punish
also,
in some way.
Sacred Scripture tells us that one of the most compelling things that anybody will hear is the word of our testimony.
Right.
So it's a good idea to practice and know what you would say to someone should they ask you about what you wear.
Right.
I have a personal conviction myself. I would generally wear a suit or a sport coat and tie, and that's becoming rare at any Mass
it
that
is.
I go
Most
to
people are like me. They're
Sunday.
more low church in that respect.
Well, yeah, exactly. However, my attitude personally is that we make certain claims about the contents of the tabernacle, and I wouldn't feel right presenting myself before the Creator of the universe on the one day that He asked me to do it, looking worse than I look for anything else that I do in my week, and have something like that ready to go. So if somebody asks you, I think that they'll receive your testimony about what you do a little better sometimes than you going after them for what they're doing.
And I think those are the three elements of it, really. It's Jesus and the Eucharist. There is the dignity of the person and how they dress. At least it should not be immodest in any way. Clean, not immodest. The poor person can't wear fancy dress necessarily, but surprisingly in places like Italy and Portugal, you'll see the poorest person have, all the get up on Sunday. And the other element is the example and the respect for your fellow parishioners who go to Mass. So I think you've got to think about those three elements: my own dignity, the dignity of the other congregants, and especially the dignity of the Eucharist.
God bless you, Marianne. We appreciate your loyalty to our Lord and His Church. 833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. Next up is Quinn in Seattle, Washington, listening to EWTN on Sacred Heart Radio. Quinn, you're on with Colin Donovan.
Hi, Colin. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure, you're welcome.
My question is it okay for Catholics to attend private mass on a Saturday night. It's after 4 p.m. To attend a private mass in basically a mass in private home, and substitute that for the Sunday obligation. Is that okay?
It is not a substitution at all. It's fulfilling the Sunday obligation, which is to Mass between the evening of Saturday and the end of Sunday. So you can go to a wedding Mass, you can go to the parish Mass, you can go to a Mass celebrated at a retreat for a small group of people. So as long as it's the Mass, as long as it's a valid Mass, and as long as the priest is in communion with the church, you've satisfied your Sunday obligation.
Do the readings for that weekend have to be used?
Not at all.
Is
If
that
you
right?
went to a nuptial Mass, you would not. You'd get the readings for the nuptial Mass
'Cause I think
or
there's-
funeral.
I've heard from other sources that the I'm not questioning you.
True.
I'm just saying that's good information to get out there, because
Yeah.
I have heard people say that it has to be the readings from the Sunday.
The text of canon law, it's an obligation to Mass. If it the church wanted to bind us to something that specific, it could have done so. It did not.
Right. Beautiful. Does that help, Quinn?
Yes, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks so much for your phone call. That frees up a line for you at 833-288 EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Next up is Marie in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, listening to EWTN on Sirius XM Channel 130. Marie, what's your question today for Colin?
Yes. I'd like to know if there are any resources that you would recommend for prodigal young adult Catholics.
Well, I don't have any young adult children, or prodigal ones at least yet. I don't know. I hope not. Never. But I think I would start out on the light end of the scale. If you find a Catholic book very engaging at Lenten time or Easter time, or at any time, you could give that to them. Or Jack points out a good apologetic work, Surprised by Truth.
A couple of them have been.
Yeah, lot of there are. Yeah, there's a whole series of them. I think at least 2 in the series. If you want to get a little bit more, a little bit more forceful, but you might start with something light that is decidedly Catholic, but may not be a hard sell. Something that would help them in their life, even if they didn't subscribe to the faith. And I can't tell you what that book might be, but that's, I think, the kind of thing that you should consider, along with an apologetic book, if you think that will be received and acted on.
Thank you, Marie. We appreciate that phone call as well. The number again is 833-288 EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. We next head to Cleveland, Ohio. Another call from Sirius XM Channel 130. You're number 1 on the satellite today, Colin.
Oh, good.
John, you are on with Colin Donovan.
Yes, hi. I appreciate you taking my call. I'm concerned and a little upset with the idea of the immigration situation as it stands today.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that there were some instances where the church had to take action, very serious, where people's lives were at stake. But I'm really concerned about the fact of, I know that there's money involved in this from the government or the state when taking in immigrants, and the safe haven areas that they get involved in is troublesome because I don't know what they're actually doing it for. Are they doing it for the safe haven or people who are breaking the law? There is a law about coming into this country, or is there that monetary situation that's involved in this kind of clouds it up and murks it up in regards to why they're making those decisions?
So what's the church's position in general on immigration and how you would kind of roll that into our own country?
Right. There's obviously something can be said theologically about immigration. There's also the pastoral practice the church has long used, and that is if you have a service that you're offering as an apostolate or a charity to others, you're not discriminating. You're not checking passports or visas. That's not what you're there for. So, for instance, very often, I'm thinking 25, 30 years ago, along the Rio Grande River Valley, where my parents were living at that time, you would get indigent women with babies, usually. This was both before they were born and after they were born. How they got in the country, sometimes they were people, their husbands were in prison in the United States or something like this. But the church doesn't ask that question. You have a human being before you with human dignity. You serve them according to their need. That's what the church does. That's what the church has always does. That's what the church does today. Now, I grant it has become something, and it's a consideration that a lot of people have raised, and that is charity is big business today. How that not only is corrupting of us, but also of the church as apostolate.
Well, can you continue this conversation in just a moment? The number to be on the program is 833-288-EWTN. It's 833-288-3986. Open Line Friday with Colin Donovan.
Father John Riccardo.
When you and I wake up every day, do we strive to know Jesus or not? Quick question to you and me right now. Is that what you and I are doing every single day?
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN Radio.
This is Life Issues with Brad Mattis, president of Life Issues Institute.
Fear-mongering is a favorite tool of those who support abortion. For example, they claim women will be charged and thrown into jail for having one. The reality is most all laws exempt women who seek an abortion from being charged. Instead, they go after the abortionists and medical facilities, as is the case in a Missouri law protecting unborn babies and their mothers. Tim Lohman, president of the Missouri Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, says the law is clear women are not to be charged and that no prosecutor in their right mind would ever prosecute a woman. That's been the case almost entirely throughout history. But pro-abortion advocates have no effective arguments to promote the killing of babies, so they make things up.
Follow us on Twitter at Life Issues USA and stay informed, more informed than you've ever been.
EWTN, helping people grow in their love and understanding of God.
I just want to share that 5 years ago, my lovely warrior princess and saint of a wife and I decided to adopt a little girl through foster care. She is the perfect round out of our family of 3 boys and her. Yes, there are challenges. Very grateful today for all the blessings that he has shown our family.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Hi, this is Cy Kellett. Later today on Catholic Answers Live. Don't miss it. It's back, the game show. Catholic Answers Live, 6 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio. Now back to Open Line with Colin Donovan.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. A couple lines open for you at 833-288-3986. We're talking to John in Cleveland, Ohio, Colin, and we're discussing the church's position on immigration and how it relates to our current situation here in America.
Yeah, there's no doubt that we saw this with the American Hospital Association when the Obama administration did the contraceptive mandate. You're on the one hand, you want our health system to work, especially in if you're running Catholic hospitals. On the other hand, once you begin accepting the government's money, you very often make it difficult to say no when they want you to do something you can't morally do. Fortunately, we've had the Catholic hospitals who stand up on different issues, and so, but that's certainly a risk. But the church's charity will always be there for those in need, regardless of race, creed, color, religion, legality or illegality. That's what Christ would have done. It wasn't the government. He said, render to Caesar what is Caesar's, what is God, to God what is God's. And rendering to another person their need in the moment, material and spiritual, is a godlike act. Now, with regard to the immigration itself and to the laws regarding immigration, I don't know that there are any theologians that would consider, I don't know that there are many lawyers that would consider this as a law of a very high category. But at the same time, as a general matter, the church has encouraged the keeping of laws because the general good requires that people be law-abiding. We don't do it where there's immorality involved, and so with regard to abortion and euthanasia and so on, Catholics are free to break those laws, to not do what the law says, and to not accept as a legitimate and just law, say Roe v. Wade or something. That's our right as Catholics. That's our right as believers. So we can do that. So when immigration, sure, it's a law. But at the other hand, these are people on your doorstep. So I'm sort of in the middle. I build the wall. Well, okay, sure, let's have regulated immigration. That's the ideal way. But on the other hand, we have to charity for those who are here and do all of that. So I think the trouble is establishing thoughtful immigration laws for our country runs into the political mess that the nation is in at the present time, so that you can't either, we can do is demagogue the subject and you can't really get it resolved. And that's unfortunate because a lot of people are suffering. So I think we need to have laws. We need to be able to regulate, for instance, the idea of criminality. If people can just walk into the country, as they do, without any regulation, that means criminals can walk into the country, guns can come into the country, drugs can come into the country, money for laundering can come into the country, and all of these things are happening. Sex trafficking of human beings can take place coming over the border as well. So there's a common sense reasons for the good of citizens and immigrant alike to have regulation of immigration. There hasn't been, and so that has encouraged this mass flood of people, and that's unjust. You can say, well, they had the choice. They didn't have to start on these long marches, but some were desperate and thought this was the way. But in any case, they're at our borders. We have to deal with it. Well, we also have to deal with the regulation of immigration because that protects immigrant and citizen alike. So this is a very knotty problem, and obviously at the national level or even the local levels, we're not dealing with it intelligently, much less charitably. And so somewhere in the middle, as Thomas always said regarding virtue, somewhere in the middle there is a solution to this, and I wish our leaders in all political parties would, seek to find one with goodwill and not for political benefit.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. Next up, Littleton, Colorado. Carol is in Colorado listening on the Catholic Radio Network. She's a first-time caller. Carol, what's your question today for Colin?
Yes, I've been listening to you for a long time, and I'm a Catholic, devout Catholic, and I'm aware, of the soul. I don't hear you speaking much about the our internal soul. So, for instance, my brother, he left the Catholic Church, and he's very focused on the world and all the conspiracies and everything. And I kept saying to him, why aren't you more focused on Christ? So my question is, how do I explain to him, and how and what, okay? Can I explain to him the interior life of our souls? Because it will dictate our life, whether we go to heaven or purgatory, hell. How do I explain what this is to him?
Well, obviously the interior life is the way that we are spiritually, intellect and will. So it's not just the prayer life. That's certainly part of the interior life, but it's also the active life and the moral life, because we not only have our intellects, we have our will. And so if you read any books on the interior life, like The Three Ways of the Interior Life, Garrigou Lagrange, or any author, then what you'll find is they talk about the interior life both in terms of that which you give up. You give up venial sin, or you give up mortal sin, you give up venial sin. You do penitence for that in order to, to strengthen the will to be able to proceed further along this path toward God. You have a life of prayer. You develop your friendship with God. You open yourself to Him. You do it first by study, by reading the Scripture, by reading holy books, by meditating on what you've read, and coming up by your own reason to try to understand what God's ways are. And then, if God so chooses, He can take you further along in the interior life, in the spiritual life. So the difficulty is this is not very understandable to people. You get the old, I don't go to church and I don't say the rosary and I don't receive the sacraments anymore, but I am a spiritual person. Because they reduce spirituality to sort of, living in an unworldly way, but it's really the way they want to live. It's not the way God wants them to live. And you rightly note that if we don't develop our interior life, which includes our moral life and the giving up of sin, then we're not going to go to heaven. Because just praying is not enough. There's also doing. This is why the church teaches that it's not just faith, but works of charity that take us to God, take us to heaven. And so anybody who is not doing one, doing both, risk their salvation if they were baptized. And so this is a very important thing. How to get people to do it, I think it's a consideration that comes along eventually, because there are not only 3 ways in the spiritual life, but there are a number of conversions that take place along the way. Sometimes people need something to wake them up with regard to the world, to have conversion from their worldly way of living, so that they'll even consider the spiritual life as something to pursue. Then you can talk about a real spiritual life, the forsaking of sin and the seeking of God and all of that. So it's going to be difficult for you to explain it. And I don't know, Jack, do you have any ideas for books that might be? I mentioned 3 ways of the spiritual life, but that's sort of a treatise on the stages of the life.
It does, really St. Francis de Sales' Introduction to the Devout Life,
yes.
Because the beginning of that book is really some pretty concrete instruction, and that might be something that would lead people down the proper path. At least they would know the where-tos and the why-fors of what to do to enter more deeply into the spiritual life.
Right, and that's a very good from a systematic approach, and for many people, Story of a Soul by Teresa of Lisieux opens up the beauty of that life and makes it attractive to them, because it's not an intellectual treatise. It's about her own life and her own way in the spiritual life, and she makes it very appealing.
And books are appealing because, a lot of times, a person can read a book and get a resource from a book while they're alone. That's why radio is so nice also. Mm-hmm. While they're alone, and they don't have to worry about anybody reading their reaction or
right.
Passing judgment on how they're receiving what's being given to them. It's to a certain extent on their own terms.
It has an anonymity about
yes.
it that doesn't, especially if before relatives and close friends, they're maybe a little bit shy about this new interest in spiritual things.
Thank you, Carol. We appreciate that call. 833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. Next up is Frank in New Orleans, Louisiana. First-time caller listening on Catholic Community Radio. Frank, welcome to Open Line. You're on with Colin.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Hello, Mr. Donovan.
Hey, Frank.
I just was kind of seeking a little further clarification about that issue discussed a few minutes ago about proper attire for Mass.
Mm-hmm.
And as I mentioned, I live in New Orleans, Louisiana, and right now it's 93 degrees here. And recently I had a weekday off. It was a weekday, not a Sunday. I was out doing errands, and I had exercised. I was out running around, and I was going back home, And just as I passed the church, which is St. Dominic's on Harrison Avenue, the church bells started to ring. And I thought, oh, my goodness, what a wonderful invitation to attend Mass. I went to weekday Mass, and I was dressed in very sloppy running clothes, exercise clothes.
We get the picture.
Do you think that maybe it would have been more appropriate for me to have passed by the church and not attended Mass and not received the Eucharist just because I was dressed, in such a sloppy, but seasonally appropriate way, for the weather down here?
Well, of course, we're in Alabama, so we understand seasonally appropriate. I think if that's how you got to Sunday Mass, you have a real question. I think that was a virtuous act on your part to go inside and, hey, I'm here, the church bells ring, I'm being called to participate in Mass. Whether you go in the front pew or something like that may be another question, but I think in that set of circumstances, I have no trouble with that.
And I think, our Lord knows the disposition of our heart.
Right.
And I think that this is a really good illustration of not only the importance of making a good decision with regard to your own attire when you go to Mass, but to reserve a certain amount of judgment upon those you see around you, not understanding what the circumstances might be.
Yeah, and there's always the self-reflection that's involved. It's like I go to Sunday Mass and I get there. Of course, people with families will understand this, but I get there late. If I try to leave early, I still get there late because, one kid's putting on his jacket, the other one's taking it off. So sometimes you can't help you. Yes, ideally, you should be there from the beginning of the Mass to end, but things happen. However, let's say you're single and you're always late for Mass. You should be asking yourself, can I not really get here on time? Should I not be making that effort to do that? So there should always be the element of self-reflection in there that if you're doing something, if you are regularly showing up in your jogging attire for Mass, that may not be such a good idea. But in the circumstance you describe, I think it's fine.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. A couple lines open for you and plenty of time for your phone calls at 833-288-3986. Jeffrey is in Middletown, Ohio, a first-time caller listening to EWTN Radio. Jeffrey, thanks for holding. You're on with Colin Donovan.
Hello. How are you guys today?
Pretty good.
Terrific, thanks.
I'm not actually Catholic. I was just wondering if, how my president stands, President Trump, on immigration and on border control. And I do agree with him putting up a wall because we are in the middle of a war right now across seas. And you never know who comes in,
You're speaking of the war on terrorism, and so, there's that risk, clearly.
Right. And we don't want to see school buses blowing up, horrific things happen, Doesn't the Pope, does he recognize this, or does he, just excuse it? I don't know how to put it.
Yeah. No, it's sort of a both-and thing. He clearly thinks there should be an element of mercy and charity involved in the accepting of refugees. On the other hand, he has in the same breath, or at least when questioned about it, has said, of course, a nation has a right to make laws about immigration. Every nation on earth does so. Canada's laws are actually stricter than ours. We've been very generous over the years. So you have a both-and situation. So what the church says is it gives us the principles in the teaching. And that is, for example, that, for those who can't feed their families in other places, they have a right to immigrate according to whatever law is established by the place they want to immigrate to. But then there can also be charity and mercy involved in that. So the two has to work together. But the practical element of settling it, that's what governments are supposed to do. That's what our politicians in Washington or Ottawa or wherever it is are supposed to do. And they're not doing things they're supposed to do. They're doing things that are a waste of time often, when they should be settling these kinds of policy issues. So I think our country, if we could ever get together on this, would indeed be merciful regarding the numbers of refugees and so on and so forth, but also must prudently also regulate its border for the reasons you cite and the reasons many others. How to do that exactly is a political question, political prudence question, and the church doesn't make those decisions. She says she doesn't make those decisions, but she teaches the principles that ought to guide the decisions of a believer with a conscience. And so even as a non-Catholic, you can listen to the principles. We can only ask yourself that evangelicals 20 years ago really pushed the kids were wearing these bands. What would Jesus do? So that's sort of the equivalent of what the church is trying to do. We need to ask ourselves from time to time, what would Jesus do? How would he help these people? Would he just simply dismiss them, send them away, do nothing? And on the other hand, we know that there are criminals, drug runners, sex traffickers, and perhaps even terrorists. And so that also has to be addressed. How it's addressed is a political issue, and our politicians are failing very badly on trying to get this solved. And you can point fingers either way depending on which party you vote. But the point is those solutions have to come out of the politicians on the practical matters of how to resolve this dichotomy between being generous and making sure that our country and these new people we ultimately accept in, they're safe. I'm sure they don't want to come here and have their drug gangs from whatever country they came from in the same neighborhood, but yet they do, in part because border control for 20 years has been so poor.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. You know, if EWTN has made a difference in your life, you can have the opportunity to help that happen to somebody else. You can be an EWTN media missionary. We will give you everything you need as far as materials and coaching on how to take the eternal word, EWTN, out to your community and in your parish. To learn more, just log on to EWTNmissionaries.com. That's EWTNmissionaries.com. Next up is Norbert. He's in Albuquerque, New Mexico, listening on the Amazon Echo. Norbert, you are on with Colin Donovan.
Good afternoon. My question, I'm trying to figure out where the women came for Adam and Eve that had grandsons. Had grandchildren.
Don't you think that they had some girls?
That's Adam what he said.
What I know about all they had was the three sons, Cain and Abel and Seth.
No, what you know is that it was thought important for divine revelation that we know about those sons. That does not exclude other possibilities. And so the general position of the fathers and doctors is that at the beginning of human history, Adam and Eve's own children married each other, daughters and sons. And so what we today rightly would speak about as incest was not a law promulgated by God by reason of the necessity of the beginning of the human race. So that's a solution to that. Now, it may not make sense to you, but it has made sense for 1,900 years to a great many theologians and ecclesiastical writers.
Next up is Charlie in Cleveland, Ohio, listening to EWTN on The Rock. Charlie, what's your question today for Colin?
Yes, thanks, Colin. You're doing a great job. Hey, what would the obligation of an immigrant be to the country that he is entering? What's he supposed to be doing?
Well, he should be, and one of the things which church documents say is that he should be grateful. And of course, with gratitude comes the moral obligation of justice, which means to live according to the laws, to pay the taxes, to do other things which citizens do, or at least which even people with green cards or other immigrants do. So it's not like it should be a free ride. It isn't. It's, all of our, as many people often say in this debate, as if you're bad people if you don't agree with the exact policies of this party or that party. We are all children of immigrants. I'm a double immigrant. Part of my family went to Canada after the War of Independence because of the flag they saluted, rightly or wrongly. And then some of us came back at different times in history. So I'm an immigrant from overseas and then an immigrant again from Canada. So immigrants have the same obligations as citizens, the same obligations as human beings to the authority of the government in the country in which they belong, the just authority of it, obviously, not abortion, euthanasia, and things like that accepted. So that's a duty they have. But again, that means they should be seeking some kind of legality in that country so that they are able to fully participate in it, and maybe down the road even be citizens and so on. But all of that is a political matter that needs to be worked out. Under Ronald Reagan, there was an effort to do that. Under George Bush, there was an effort to do that, and his own party shot it down. And I think under the current president, the other party shot it down. So what gives? We need to speak among ourselves and settle the kinds of issues that are absolutely necessary if we're going to talk about integration into a country. And the church does. That's the responsibility of immigrants, to integrate and respect the cultures and the culture and the tradition of the country into which they immigrate.
Quickly, we'll head to Brenda in Katy, Texas, listening on Guadalupe Radio, a first-time caller. Brenda, you're on with Colin Donovan.
Hey, how are y'all doing?
Yeah, hi.
Terrific, Brenda. Just about a minute left. What's your question?
Okay, just real quick. I'm an extraordinary minister of communion, but I've recently come across some things about really lay people really shouldn't be giving out communion. It should be more of an emergency situation that they should be brought forth to help out.
Okay, we're running out of time. You better let me answer that. First of all, the word emergency is never used in any of the documents. The normative thing is that the priest and the deacon are the ordinary ministers of Holy Communion, and that others can be designated by need. And the celebrant, or if the bishop makes a norm for his diocese, he could establish some norm. The celebrant is ultimately, so it's the kind of catch-22 where, yes, if you're more traditional like we are here at EWTN, clearly don't favor the overuse of extraordinary ministers. But it ultimately becomes a pastoral decision of the pastor or even the celebrant. And there's a hierarchy of who should be chosen. Installed acolytes, in other words, these are typically men on the way to the priesthood. And then among the laity, only them. So this is a neuralgic problem in the last 20 years or 30 years or so. But we're sort of caught by this catch-22 that in the end it's up to the celebrant, and he may abuse that permission or he may use it according to the mind of the church.
Colin, thanks for being so gracious with your time as always.
You're welcome.
On behalf of our host, Colin Donovan, producer Michael McCall, call screener Ryan Penny, and our social media maven, Mr. Jeff Burson, I'm Jack Williams. Thanks so much for another great week of EWTN's Open Line. Back at it next week. Until we get together then, God bless.